Welcome to The Explainer. For decades, that Made in Germany stamp, it meant something, right? It was a guarantee of industrial might. But what happens when a country's biggest strength suddenly becomes its biggest weakness? Today, we're going to dig into the economic shockwave that's hitting Germany as its whole export-based model faces a challenge it's never seen before.
And look, this isn't just some dry economic theory. Listen to this pretty stark warning from Oliver Richtberg. This is a guy who represents thousands of German manufacturers. He is on the front lines, and what he's seeing is a deeply worrying trend right in the heart of the German economy.
And here's one of those statistics he's talking about. Get this, a 4.5% drop in industrial production in just 6 months. For an economy that's famous for being stable, that's not just a blip on the radar. That's a real tremor. And it has alarm bells ringing everywhere, from the factory floors all the way to the top levels of government.
Now, it's tempting to just blame this on things we've been hearing about, like high energy prices or new trade tariffs. And yeah, you're not wrong. Those are definitely part of the story. But economists are pointing to something way deeper, a much more fundamental shock, one that's shaking the very foundations of Germany's entire economic model.
Okay, so to really get what's happening now, we've got to rewind a bit. We have to go back to what they call the first China shock. This was back when China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. All of a sudden, global markets were flooded with cheap goods, and it had a pretty devastating effect on manufacturing in a lot of Western countries, especially the US.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Germany was the big exception. While you had towns in America losing factories left and right, Germany's manufacturing sector didn't just survive that first shock, it actually thrived. So how on earth did they manage to win when so many others lost?
And this right here, this shows you the whole game. See, for the US, China was a direct competitor, making similar stuff, just cheaper. But for Germany? Oh, China was the perfect customer. While China was building up all its factories, it needed high-end German machinery. And as their middle class started to grow, what did they want? German luxury cars.
It was like the perfect storm, really. Everything just lined up for them. You had this massive demand coming from China's boom. At the same time, Germany had passed some key labor reforms to stay competitive. It was benefiting from new supply chains in the EU, and the euro actually helped keep its exports affordable. Germany was just in the right place at the right time, selling the right things.
But that golden era, it is decisively over. A new, second China shock has arrived. And this time, Germany isn't protected from the fallout. In fact, it is square in the crosshairs. And listen, the warnings we're hearing now are, well, they're serious. The economist Dalia Marin calls it an existential shock. She's suggesting it could lead to a deindustrialization that's even worse than what the US experienced. We're not just talking about a recession here, we're talking about the potential collapse of an entire economic model.
So what's so different this time? Well, everything. The whole nature of the competition has changed. China isn't just exporting toys and t-shirts anymore. Now it's producing advanced, high-tech goods, the exact cars, machines, and electronics that are the very things Germany is famous for.
So, you have to ask, how did this happen? How did Germany's biggest customer become its fiercest competitor in just a couple of decades? Well, let me tell you, it was no accident.
You can actually see the strategy play out on this timeline. This was a long game. After joining the WTO, China launched its Made in China 2025 plan. The stated goal? To dominate advanced manufacturing. And then, bam! By 2023, they hit this incredible milestone, becoming the world's #1 car exporter.
I mean, just look at these numbers. It is wild. In 2019, China imported 1 million more cars than it exported. Just 4 years later, it exported 5 million more than it imported. That's not a change. That's a complete flip in a sector Germany has owned for a century.
And this quote, it just perfectly captures that whoa moment on the ground. You had German execs who couldn't travel during the pandemic, and when they finally went back to China, they found that their competitors had made this massive technological leap. They were literally blindsided by how fast things had changed.
So you might think, wow, China just outsmarted them. But German industry leaders are saying, hold on, it's not a level playing field. They point to Chinese products being about 30% cheaper, huge estate subsidies, and what they see as a habit of, let's say, skirting international rules.
Okay, let me show you a really specific and kind of wild example of what they're talking about. This is the official CE mark. If you see this in Europe, it's a guarantee. It means a product meets really strict health, safety, and environmental standards. It's a symbol of trust.
But then you see this logo on some Chinese goods. It looks almost identical, right? But when people ask about it, the explanation given is that it just means China exported. You can see why German manufacturers feel like this is a deliberate move to cause confusion and piggyback on the EU's reputation.
So all of this, it brings Germany to a major crossroads. But why is this second shock so much more dangerous for Germany than the first one ever was for the US? Well, the answer is built right into the DNA of its economy.
And this chart right here tells a huge part of the story. Over 42% of Germany's entire economy depends on exports. Think about that. Nearly half of their economy is tied to selling stuff to other countries. The US, it's just over 10%. So when your biggest markets start to dry up, your whole model is at risk.
And it's not just about exports. Manufacturing itself is just a much bigger deal in Germany. It's almost a fifth of their whole economy, compared to around a tenth in the US. So yeah, a punch to the manufacturing sector in Germany, it just lands so much harder.
Okay, so what's the game plan? What can they actually do about this? Well, there are a few big ideas being thrown around. 1, boost demand at home so they're not so reliant on other countries. 2, create a unified EU-wide industrial policy. 3, use tariffs to level the playing field against subsidized imports. And then there's a fourth idea, which is pretty radical.
And this is where the story gets a final ironic twist. Some experts are basically saying, hey, Germany, for decades you were the teacher, now you need to become the student. They argue Germany needs to reverse engineer China's own playbook of strategic investment just to catch up in key technologies.
And that leaves us with the big question, right? The German Wirtschaftswunder, their economic miracle, was built on this one powerful export-led idea. But now that idea is being challenged like never before. So can they do it again? Can they reinvent themselves for a new era? Or is this really the end of an era?
So what's the big takeaway here? It's a pretty powerful lesson in how the global economy works. In a world that changes this fast, what was once your greatest strength can become your biggest vulnerability, almost overnight. Thanks for watching The Explainer.